Hey, what's up, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning to another episode of the Financial Griot, aka TFG. We're here. We love to discuss about just stories in regards to wealth, make an impact on our journeys, and just a healthy way of how can we make actionable steps in being the best version of ourselves. I am one of three of the co-hosts, Alainta Ellison. And unfortunately, today I'm here by myself. Well, technically, I'm not alone. Today, I have an awesome guest that went and attended the FinCon out here in Orlando, Florida. His name is Robert Metzger. And he has such a great platform about just family, faith, and just interconnected conversations of things that he wanted to know when he was young as well. And I seen your content once I add you on IG. I seen your content about the video of your daughter, and you were taking her to the bank to
Yes.
open a savings account, and let's just say at a credit union, let's just put it out there. At a credit union, she had her piggy bank there, and she was just so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, who is this person? And I just start following you and just start listening to your podcast. And I think the daddy daughter duo is just like incredible, because here in the Financial Griot, our stories interconnected, with our Haitian background, because we're all Haitian, first generation Haitian Americans. And we use the word griot because, in slavery times, we came together and share meals. Not only we share meals, we share stories. And that's how that knowledge and everything else was shared amongst us. So we bring in, culturally the things back where we love to share in our community and share amongst ourselves. But for you to bring your daughter along with this journey and to share with her the conversations that you didn't have when you was younger, and I think it's fantastic just having her, exposed to those money conversations, just I guess come to age conversations as well, because it is tough, because my mom is Haitian. It was so hard just trying to get her to understand about different
Absolutely.
Americanized
Absolutely.
cultures, right? So Robert, thank you so much for being a guest on TFG. Let people know, who are you?
Thank you so much for introducing me first and foremost and inviting me. We were not able to connect physically at FinCon, but
FinCon, right?
I'm glad we were able to connect after the fact. Yeah, my name is Robert Metzger Jr. I am a physical therapist by trade. And I have two lovely daughters, Divine and Journey. And I have a wife, Charity, who has been tremendously helpful in just raising and supporting the vision that I'm trying to do with Family Abide. This kind of came along. And I think one of the biggest things that is allowing yourself to be pushed and allowing your spouses to push you. So, for the longest time, I was just thinking about, what are we going to do? Or, at one point I wanted to open up a clinic or start a physical therapy clinic, do some of the entrepreneurial spirit. But, times change, your focus has changed. Things may not be as conducive to your lifestyle. And she kind of just challenged me. She's like, what do you want your legacy to be for your children and for you?
What she said? Bring that back. Bring that back, Robin. What she said?
She was like, what do you want your legacy to be? And I mean, she is a professional dancer by trade. So I mean, I think the goal of that was trying to spark an interest of us potentially opening a business together. And I don't think was what she was expecting out of it. But I at first was resistant because I was just like, hey, we're trying to provide, I don't think we should just be jumping out here and, jumping into entrepreneurship 100%, things could be unstable. But I was like, what would I invest in? And I just thought there's no greater investment than investing in my family and investing in our children to prepare them for opportunities to see the world differently than how I saw it. And I think a lot of that's derived of, like you were talking about, being a first generation American. And things are different. And, the perceptions are different. I mean, a lot of times, both my parents were there, but I would say a lot of times the way that they looked at the world slightly different than the way maybe we looked at the world.
Exactly.
And
That was such a cultural difference,
yeah,
trying to do that. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, education was everything in our household. And education has opened a lot of doors for me, but there's some doors that education can't open. I mean, and it's just, some doors, relationships can open certain doors. God can open certain doors through faith. Money can open certain doors, which, not everybody has access to, but I think it's just preparing them to see the world in a way where they are fully informed and aware of their options and choices. And I think that's very powerful. And I don't think it's happening quite enough in society today.
Oh, absolutely. You made some great points about just like finding out, number one, what business structure you were going to do, right? With your
Hmm.
wife. So it seemed as though this came about a little bit differently than what you expected. And funny enough, when you think about entrepreneurship, or you think about like, a hobby or something that you're, seriously interested in, most times you don't think about just investing in your children and creating that entrepreneurship around that content. And I think that when we're discussing like family relations and legacy, right? Your
Hmm.
wife, shout out to your wife, your wife made a great, discussion and point about that is legacy, because we talk a lot, and I think we get the gist of what's going on right now with the topics right now.
Hmm. Yeah,
Generational wealth, right? Everyone sounds like, a recording
the
player or something.
buzzwords.
Yeah, it is such a buzzword.
Hmm.
But the thing that I commend you on, right? And,
Hmm.
of launching, this content, as well as having a successful podcast with your daughters, is that you're not only, creating a legacy and generational wealth, but you also do a generational action, right? It's
Hmm.
the action that you're placing behind your content and behind your platform with your daughters, because you're investing in them, as well as sharing the information and the knowledge with other people as well. And just having tough conversations, man. Like, it's like me being Haitian, I'm first generation, right? So
Hmm.
having conversation with my mom was so difficult.
Yeah.
Even things like you couldn't tell island mom about you have feelings for a boy at school. You can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you
Yeah.
can't have those conversations. So even when the money conversations come up as well. So you are your parents, you mentioned to me before, are from Sierra Leone, which is in Africa.
Hmm.
But you also have a history lineage towards Germany as well. Can you give people, that history link? Because we were just talking about it, because your last name is Metzger.
Yes.
So can you just let us know how that came about?
So that definitely helps me, with resumes, because when my name is Robert Metzger, people come in,
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
who's that? It's like, well, that's me. Yeah.
So you
Um,
catch him.
so basically my and it was beautiful. In 2019, we were able to do like a family reunion, but our family tree on both of my parents' sides. So both of my parents are from Sierra Leone, West Africa, and the capital of Sierra Leone is called Freetown. And basically, for those who don't know, very similar to Liberia. Liberia was,
Right.
and kind of like, even hate some Haitian as far as free slaves, but um, they were established as a colony by the British, and a lot of slaves that were during the Revolutionary War time period, and during that were also, but prior to that, who were running away from slavery. A lot of them went north, and one of the biggest areas that they ended up living in was Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia had a large influx of free slaves that migrated from the south through the north. I guess they didn't settle anywhere in the United States per se. They ended up going to Nova Scotia. So once Freetown was being created, and part of the charter was like, hey, we're going to create this whole area for slaves that are going back to West Africa. So during this time frame, a lot of what you have, Americans, Canadians, people who were here who have lost a lot of their heritage. They didn't know fully about their heritage or where they were from, decided that they were going to make a trip back to West Africa. So they end up going to Freetown and they became known as the Creoles. So they were kind of like known as um, a mix between the Africans and then also the Americans. Ultimately, as that story goes, it does create some of the tensions um, because they were English colonies, the what we would call the indigenous or the natives of that area may have been marginalized a little bit because the English colonies end up giving a lot of the jobs and the structures to the people who already knew a little bit more of the Western system. So that Creoles ended up being a lot of that initially. So it ended up creating some tensions. So there's always lines. It's funny. It's always lines where we end up dividing ourselves. Sometimes in America, it's black and white, but other places it could be different types of backgrounds. So
right, it's always division somewhere.
yeah. So unfortunately, but I mean, was great though that they were able to make that journey across the Atlantic twice. A lot of those people came across, without a choice, but they were able to go back by choice and start a family, start just a whole generation to where they could create for their family. So I've been, and my parents used to go frequently, but not as much anymore just since the pandemic. But yeah, it's something that's that it's a unique story, and it's something that reminds me every day that I'm uniquely connected to the continent.
Mm, absolutely right. I was just gonna say the connection in between that, and it's pretty dope too and fascinating that you can give a history breakdown of where your parents are from and how the last name is interconnected with your family tree, right?
Yeah.
It is a unfortunate, occurrence in the Black community when we can't share not only our family history but historically how we're interconnected with the continent as well, in Africa. You can go online and do your
Yeah.
tribal in different countries in Africa and
Mm-hmm.
such, right? But there's something to be said when you can like physically give a breakdown like you did there to say where you're from and how your family play a role in history and the interconnection with the motherland. So that's really dope, and I think it's a beautiful thing too. You can share that knowledge with your daughters where they know where they're from and their father and their grandparents as well.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned to me about the education. Your parents
Mm-hmm.
are from Sierra Leone, and I know a lot of Africans or just I just know a lot of Africans are really serious about education.
Yeah.
But how was it? Because I know there's a push for education, which they understand, and a lot of us do understand that it leads out of the poverty mindset, and that's as well as the poverty life, right? But
Mm-hmm.
how was just the money conversation around it? Because I think most time, even for my family as well, they just assume when you go to college, you have all this money waiting for you after you graduate, and it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because um both my parents are very well educated too. So my father, it's kind of weird. My father went in to school in Russia, so he actually learned Russian, and basically everybody's trying to get scholarships. So he got a scholarship to a school in Russia. He went to Russia for his undergrad and his master's, and then he came to Howard and got his PhD at Howard in architecture. And then my mom went to school in England and ended up becoming a nurse in England, and then they came here. So a lot of times, when you are from West Africa or during that, the gold standards, hey, we're gonna go abroad, we're gonna get an education, we're gonna make a life for ourselves, and that's how it is. So even like in today's day and age, C's weren't really allowed. I'll put it that way in our household. C's are the same thing as failing. But as I get older, as I get more mature, I can kind of understand that there's nuances to this, in the sense that my brother said something very interesting. It's like, we tend to, as far as that culture, we tend to put professionalism at a higher plateau than entrepreneurship. So you might be pushed to be a doctor or a lawyer or a surgeon, but no one ever say, "Oh, why don't you open up a business to be an entrepreneur?" And I want our children to feel just as comfortable being a doctor or lawyer, or being an entrepreneur, or solving, because really entrepreneurship is solving or addressing someone's needs. And if we can address someone's needs, and you could be happy, if you be happy, taken care of financially, and committed, and purpose driven, then that's something we should talk about, and we should also be celebrate. And that hasn't always been celebrated in our communities.
Yeah, so true, because my family and just Haitian, it's just like an inside joke. If in the culture where they only want you to be a doctor, lawyer, or nurse, in the Haitian culture, right? If you're either of those things, or maybe an engineer too.
Yeah.
If you're not either of those things, it's like you have failed everyone in your culture, or your family lineage, right? So it is something to be said how education is pushed among us, and that we have to become this level of professions in different lines of networks, different lines of industries, to whatever we decide. But the entrepreneurship is not really explored as much, or even the idea of entrepreneurship, or something that you may essentially be good at, you can turn into a business. And it's quite funny, because I joke with my mom all the time, because she always tell me, why are you so money, and you're always talking about money, or you're talking about real estate, and I'm like, but Mom, you do the same thing. Even before you came to this country, you have multiple properties in Haiti. There's some kind of money aspect that you're not acknowledging yourself, and of course that would have passed down to me. Although you don't have those conversations directly to me, your actions have sought out to me to kind of explore different things. And I kind of say that many things don't happen by accident. Some things are like just guided well for some people, because I always mention, when it comes to just children, or when it comes to adults sometimes too, we don't lack ambition. That's not something culturally we lack. We lack guidance. you know and I went through a lot of transformation and diversion, I guess, right? But it led me to where I am. I am successful in some facet or form, but I think it would have been lesser of a track if I had more of a guidance. But the thing was, education was pushed heavy, and not thinking, I have scholarships. Yeah, these things can pay for it, but how do you live? Like we don't have those conversations. I'm like, I could be a professional, but how do I pay my car loan?
and even with that, a lot of times, I'm in Prince George's County in Maryland, and traditionally it's been known as the richest majority minority county
in Maryland,
in the country. And one of the things is that you have a lot of professionals who are actually struggling, and they don't realize, if one's because they didn't have those money conversations, two, it's because the only thing they really prioritized was getting education. But you know what? That comes at a cost. It's 100,000, 200, 300,000. There's lawyers, doctors at $400,000 in debts. They're living a paycheck to paycheck, trying to live with the Jones. It's like, well, I struggled for all this time to become a lawyer or become a doctor. Now, when I do get a little bit of money, I want to actually try to enjoy it, but they didn't have, maybe like other cultures, they might not have their grandfather or their grandparents with a trust to set up for them to go to scholarship. And then they weren't educated about what resources were available to them to get certain types of loans forgiveness or grants or scholarships. So we're at we are disenfranchised in a lot of tense areas in the sense, even though we may become a professional, but the professional struggle can be real as well. So, I mean, I think that's something that's probably not appreciated because people don't want to hear about a doctor or a lawyer who's living a paycheck to paycheck.
It's not palatable to people, right? They
Yeah.
Number one, it's not palatable, and number two, they don't relate to it because if you are a doctor, lawyer, or in your case, a physical therapist, you know, you receive all this education and this experience in the professional, you know, realm of your industry. But when it comes to the day in, a day out of the average person, they don't relate to you, right? Because the average person is trying to get over that hump of paying their car note, getting gas, paying for their children daycare, paying for expenses of life, right?
Absolutely.
So that is a disconnection as well. But funny enough that you mentioned it because I forget which outlet, but it was somewhere out there where professionals who are making over six figure, just as grossly, right, are still living paycheck to paycheck.
Absolutely.
The reception, I guess the pending recession, I'm not sure, wherever you want to call it at this point, whatever you want to call it at this point, it's making it even tougher, right? Because inflation happens, prices are rising, inventory is crazy at certain places. And you have the cycle of people are constantly, you know, paying for things or financing their life, but they don't, financing their lives, but they don't change, you know, their expenses or trying to adjust their lifestyle, right? So that's why that is the conversation, living paycheck to paycheck when you are making so much money. So what do you think in terms of like, it's a gap in our community where they want us to get all this education without I guess not really amassing so much of debt, because that comes hand in hand, but how do you live up to those standards is more of the question. How do you live up to those standards, because you're now a professional, you have accumulated all this debt, but you have to live a certain way as well, right?
So,
even something you may not value, it's the perception that because you're this profession, right?
So, you know, I tell people I'm the living embodiment of my parents' dream. You know, you go to school, you marry, you get a wife, you went to Howard, you went to Emory.
You
know, you come out, you know, physical therapist, got a doctorate from physical therapy. And but the things about it is that we don't talk as a community, we don't have the knowledge. So you know, recently I actually had $222,000 of public service loan forgiveness recently. And, you know, I work for an organization. I work for a nonprofit organization, a large nonprofit hospital system. And a lot of people say, oh, I didn't know that was a nonprofit. Well, you know, my thing is to work strategically. Hey, how can I pay as little back on this loan and maximize the benefit of a nonprofit, a public service loan forgiveness, working for a nonprofit. And we have over 30,000 employees. I know one of maybe three people ever to get it. And I'm like, why do we have such a lack of understanding and knowledge of people? It's kind of those things like, don't nobody tell you, like, oh, well, you have all these things available to you, but nobody's willing to shepherd you or guide you how to get to the other side of the bridge and just let you fight for yourself and figure it out. And I just think that is so traumatic to people, because first of all, you're seeing them suffer, and second of all, they don't have to. And so, you know, those are kind of the things like, hey, well, maybe I need to, you know, make my story a little bit louder, because like, yo, this is, you know, I'm not the richest, I'm not a millionaire. I hope to become a millionaire one day, but that's not how I determine wealth. But wealth is that I can go to sleep at night and know that I don't have to pay back $220,000. I can go.
Talk your talk, Robert.
You know,
talk your talk.
So it's different ways to define wealth. So I just really want to make sure that, you know, whether it be our children or, you know, you never know who you're inspiring. You might inspire someone else to be like, hey, this is the path I'm going to take, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. But just realizing, hey, they are opportunities out here to excel, and you have to be exposed to that. And a lot of times we're just not exposed as people of color to those communities, or we don't have that person hipping you to game when you're young. A lot of times people in outside communities, they'd be like, hey, I'm setting up, just trust you. I'm going to show you, I got these connections. I'm going to show you certain things. And we're just like, hey, just work hard. And working hard is great, but it's not the holy grail.
Oh, you made some points. I was just here, just like, yes, bring them to church. No, this is incredible. And let's just go back to that, because you did place that in your information that I learned is you got over $200,000 of student loan from your graduate degree forgiven.
Correct.
Simply because you just follow the guidelines, you just did everything you need to do and apply for the public service loan forgiveness. And one of those prerequisite, of course, is that if you work for a nonprofit, in your case, you did. So a few things. It's because you mentioned that, you said, how can I pay little upfront? So I don't have to pay more on the back end, right?
Yeah.
And I think an equivalent to that is delayed gratification, because rather than just, now I have this doctorate. My people would love you, by the way. Now I have this doctorate in physical therapy. Let me just do live up the Joneses, pay for everything that I want to do and whatever. So you delayed that and looked into resources that'll be able to better you in the long run. So, 10 plus years, how many years later, you are now forgiven for your loans. That is incredible, because I think some people just look at, well, he did it. He probably, jump across hoops and, I don't think that's the story. I think the story is there's resources or information, there are people who have done it, and it's not as difficult as you may see. Sometimes we live too much in our heads and just get over anxiety to think that it can't happen to us. But you have people that look like you, are probably in different situations, but they still utilize those resources that help them get to a better financial state. So I wonder why there is a disconnection too when it comes to that, because you mentioned that either they don't have the resources, don't have the information, or they don't have people around them, but also I kind of think that what we don't know not only costs us financially, but it's bearing us into this social conscious of not knowing what to do, not knowing our purpose, all these others deep rooted issues that we don't want to address. So what do you think is more or less the disconnection of people wanting to know and people who have people around them that is educating them and trying to help them, but some people just not, they're not tapping in?
I think it's a twofold. I think you guys had I listened to your last podcast and you were talking about opportunity codes or something like that.
Social mobility or opportunity costs?
Social, I think it was social mobility, depending on where your zip code is.
Okay, social mobility, yeah. Social mobility.
So I mean, it's cool, when we go, we got homecoming coming up and we're gonna go back and everybody wants to look nice and talk about, hey, what you doing and what you doing this. But I think sometimes we prioritize the wrong things. And we have to break down the stigma, just as, whether it be men talking to other men about families and, hey, what are you doing for your children? Are you starting up at 529 or you doing this, instead of just always talking about, hey, we talking about the ball game, or, oh man, that shorty over there look nice. Or, you expand your vocabulary in the way that we talk to people and talk to others. Because I don't think nobody owes it to us for them to tell us. And though we think that, well, why didn't you tell me? It's like, well, let's start creating these conversations. You have to kind of show, and you have to kind of show that you want it. And then hopefully you have people around you who be like, yeah, I did that, or we can do that, or why have you tried about this? So accountability partners to have those conversations with, even with student loan forgiveness, it's like, well, it's advantageous to put money into your retirement, because if you put money into pre-tax retirement, It reduces your AGI, which is adjustable gross income, which reduces your student loan payments, which you get double the money. So you get decreased student loans and then you get increased investment property. It's like, well, no one, it's like, what, why wouldn't you do it if you can? But I mean, some of that is, you know, we're on the struggle bus. Some of that is that we put ourselves on the struggle bus because we want to be with the Joneses. We want to be able to do certain things. So, and then unconsciously, we're teaching our children the same thing. Hey, when that new sneakers drop, you got to get it. Oh, when that new Xbox, you got to, like, what, you know, you got to put in a little bit to say, hey, what are the priorities that we're teaching our children? What are the priorities we're teaching each other, not only by what we're saying, but by our actions? And we need to hold each other accountable to pushing each other to be great.
So are you saying that people friends suck? they're not holding each other accountable? Upgrade your friends?
ET says something. I've been listening to Eric Thomas, and he was like, we hang around a lot of cheerleaders. Stop hanging around cheerleaders. Because cheerleaders ain't gonna push you. They just rah-rah. So sometimes you need people to actually hold you accountable, and you want to be around people who are better than you.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, because if you are the best person in your circle, ultimately, and it's a beauty to give, but you want to be reciprocal in your giving, because as you give, you're supposed to receive. And you don't want somebody to just use you up in that giving process. So it is important.
What do you feel as though with your podcast with Family Abide, with the Faith Family Finance podcast, that you would like for, you know, parents and their children to have more conversations about?
Yeah, I think that I want my daughters to be able to go into any room and feel comfortable, whether they're in a room with a CEO who's been doing it for 50 years or for somebody who just opening up a bank account. I think a lot of times, you know, that imposter syndrome is real, especially for females of color. And not that they don't know or they can't know money, it's that they have anxiety, feel scared of, and don't feel like they belong. Like, hey, you should know and have access to as much as this as anybody else does. And they really don't know that much more than you. And if you step in the room, and it's crazy when you step in a room and you have a certain way that you carry yourself. Yeah, I know what compound interest is. Yeah, I know what a 529 is. Yeah, I know what the way that people interact with you is different. And my goal for them, and I want to hopefully inspire other parents and other people, is like, hey, allow your children or give them the audacity to feel that they can go into any room and that they deserve to be there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's one of those things that it doesn't only involve your children. Like, you know, it's such a generational concept, because even now I'm trying to work and you know how we talked about earlier, how, you know, have these conversations with our parents. I'm still trying to have these conversations with my parents because it's on the other side, you know, because now it's like, hey, you have property back in West Africa. What happens if something happens to you? Who has that paperwork? How are we going to hold that accountable? What are your insurance papers? And that's a whole different challenge, you know, trying to have those conversations, because you still always a child, but those are conversations that are important to have too. So, you know, as we're raising up their next generation, we can't give up on the generation that preceded us and saying, hey, you know, part of your legacy is allowing us to honor you, even when you may not be here, by having your wishes in place, by having your property in order, by knowing what resources are available to you, and to make sure that who's ever remaining is as comfortable and taken care of as possible. And unfortunately, that's a whole nother set of circumstances that we often do not talk about until there's a fire.
Ooh, yeah. So we actually talk about that a lot, that specific topic on our podcast. And funny enough that you mentioned it is because that entire concept that you were talking about with discussing those sort of topics with your parents is called the sandwich effect.
Mm,
Right, it's a multi-generational I guess compound situation and circumstances where you have your parents who have done all these sacrifices to provide for you, but the lack of preparation that they've done for themselves
mm,
has cost you from, the back end.
yeah.
Because now you have your family, you're trying to provide for your family, but you also have to prepare for your grandparents as well, as they potentially retire, or as
Mm,
they, untimely death or any,
mm,
sickness and stuff. So it's like a trickle down effect. Think about a sandwich, the two breads,
mm,
you got your meat, and it's called a sandwich effect. And we discuss this on our podcast because we think that is one of the most vital conversations that you need to have with your parents, because Lawrence always say, if your parents don't have a retirement plan, just know that you are their retirement plan. Right. And I mentioned on our previous episodes that it took me years, like collectively with my siblings, is six of us, took us a minute to get my mom just to have life insurance.
mm,
Life insurance for her, I think. Well, maybe for some certain, older parents as well, but it's the reality that you have to come face to face with mortality,
mm,
right? In the conversation that you're now having with your children, in the event that you may pass away, or in the event that you are sick or you can no longer work, how does that look like? What do you want? What do
mhm,
you want? What resources can we, uh, tap into? What can we do? Because we want to honor you. You made a great point. You want to honor your parents in an untimely death or in just in sickness, however, right? But it's that preparation, and
mhm,
we lack guidance. We're
yeah.
ambitious, right? We're going back
Mhm,
to that. We just lack guidance. We don't
absolutely.
know. And it's a disservice in our community. The things we don't know really is
Impacts us.
impact us a lot in different stances, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they call it a sandwich effect. And I think it's one of those conversation discussions that's really tough to have, not only with your parents, but for you to identify in yourself that you're not really financially prepared. So how
Mm,
are you going to have the conversation with your parent to know that, hey, if mom or dad can't no longer work, where they going to live? Who's
mhm,
going to pay for this? If they have a mortgage, how are we going to pay for the mortgage? They continuously have a mortgage in retirement. Are we going to sell the home, right? So
mhm,
there's different conversations that we have, that it's not just openly anymore. It's really like, close to us, because we can't really have those conversations in a comfortable space, because you don't want to feel as though you're disrespecting your parents, but
yeah.
you
Respect is
also,
a big thing.
yeah, respect is huge.
Mhm,
Right? But you also want to have those conversation in a respectful way, but also in a healthy way. But in order to do that, you have to identify that healthy conversation with yourself too, of where
mhm,
are you in that financial journey, or how can you financially position yourself, or either just get that knowledge of what to do and the resources to help your family and yourself. Right. So that's really good that you mentioned that, because we don't have those things enough. And I see it time and time again, where there's countless of GoFundMe's and countless
mm,
of donations that, simple burials,
mhm.
simple burials that cost average between $5,000 or $10,000.
But it's more challenging even for immigrants, because where do you want to go? Do you want to be here? Do
Or
you
do
want
you
to
want
be
to be in
back?
your
Yeah.
country?
Like
Right,
like
right.
and there's a cost with that. More of a cost than a traditional um and those are like fundamental things. Like I don't want to be guessing like when that time comes. So it's challenging. So I mean, I think having open and honest conversations, even like with our children or earlier in lives, allows us to prepare them to feel confident talking to us about some of those issues in which we may have struggled talking to our parents with. So, hopefully this is like really like a living diary, a
Mm.
living for her to always be like, hey, this is what my father thought was important. to me and to my siblings about how you should live your life, not only just financially, but like ethically and morally, and
Yeah,
the value
yeah.
of family, and the value of giving back and helping others. So
Did you ever think, I guess, in any concepts of just conversation with your daughters, that it could be a tough conversation, or is it certain things that you're waiting as they get older to understand? Because I know when they're younger, they're a little bit, your daughter was really excited to open up her savings account, but do you think
yeah,
certain conversations is a little bit, down the line?
I mean, they're definitely going to be tough conversations down the line. I mean, I think a lot of people, even though they're more work, I think when they're younger, it's easier from a conversation standpoint, because the conversations flow a little bit easier. It's more about necessities. What do you eat? How do you feel? But I'm even starting to feel that already. Ask her, like, what happened at school? Nothing. I'm like, what do you mean nothing? She just started
Oh,
kindergarten. Like, like, who's your friend? Who you think? So those things are already starting to develop. I can imagine, like, if you're not having those conversations earlier, like, how much more of you just kind of not um involved. I think they say that, before the age of 8, the parents are the primary influencer in a child's life. Then after that, it's their friends. And so you got to pour in as much as you can during these time frames to make sure that, hey, you want to go, you want to travel, you want to do this, you want to see this person, you want to see, you want to go to a football game, or you want to, just so they experience these things, so they know it's like, hey, I've done that. I'm open. I have these, moments that I can reflect upon and feel comfortable in these circumstances, or others that, my family is going to be down for us.
yeah. And I think it's really good that exposing children to different conversations, especially when it comes to money, but also having a driving faith as well, like a purpose, and something that they want to reference to, something that they feel, because it's important for just in adults in general to find a faith-based something bigger than themselves. And with
Yeah.
children, when you have that and they see their parents having that as well, or having those conversations with them, is more not only an influence but more of a standard too,
Mm-hmm.
because you're talking it but you're also walking within those actions as well, because they look at you, you're like one of their big cheerleaders, but also their first mentors, their first people, you're having these deep conversations with. So that's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely vital. And I'm just so happy about your content, your podcast, and everything that you are doing, because these are conversations that we should have in our communities, and things that should be shared amongst other people and their friends, because most times it's just taking just a simple like, hey, what's up, let's talk about this or that, in terms of
Yeah.
money, or in terms of issues that you're dealing with, because most time you're not alone, we just suffer in
We
silence.
suffer in silence all too much. And you made me think about some abide is the acronym as well. It means, the second definition of abide means to endure without yielding. And I think we need to endure without yielding, because the prize is not always, $1 million. The prize is that we are still here. But abide also is abundance beyond our insecurities, debts, and entanglements. And why I thought that was important, because people always talk about this abundance versus I can't even think uh I forgot what scarcity mindset.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Abundance versus scarcity mindset. So I just always felt like, hey, the first thing that we always got to think of, and that's just, whether it's just being thankful for God, allowing that, he's provided so much for us already. But beyond that, we always have these insecurities that, regardless in our lives, have insecurities about who we are, how we relate to other people, how we evaluate situations. And acknowledging that is like important, because if we always talk about abundance without acknowledging our insecurities, it's kind of comes off as like false, because that is not honesty. And, you have to have some type of honesty. And then debts would be well, beyond our debts. And then debts can be so many different things. We have debts financially, we have debts morally, we have debts. It's just more things that we become attached to that we want, and realizing that we need to understand that they're there, but also move past that. And then the last thing was entanglements. And entanglements, not necessarily the way that Will and Jada's brought it, but I just like
Right.
after she used the word, I really like the word entanglement, and looking it up. It's not necessary. You could be entangled in a good thing.
Yeah.
Entanglement means loss of control. So a lot of times people are entangled in social media because they can't remove themselves from it. They can be entangled to money. They can be entangled to promiscuity. They can be entangled to their perception of themselves. They can be entangled, and just realizing like, hey, you have to find a focus and a center. And a lot of times that focus and center has to be outside yourself, because if your only focus is centered on yourself, you will have challenges in the way that you perceive the world. So your lens colors the way in which you see the world a lot of times. So we need to be aware of that, and aware that, yeah, this is my boo thing, but you can be entangled in the wrong boo thing, or you can be entangled in, you can be entangled in anything that's, so you have to keep that open mindset to make sure that, like, what am I doing this for? So, yeah, you kind of made me think about, just kind of how I came about choosing that word as well. So, thank you.
I like it. Family abide. I like it. And I'm catching up on more episodes
Yeah.
of your podcast, because I don't only just reach out to, guests who want to be on featured or just interviewed, but if I truly like your content or it relates to me, then I'm going to listen to, because you have a fan. I'm a fan. So I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to share with other people as well. And we don't see a lot of, not necessarily just Black fathers, but Black content creators who push just family into the midst, in the midst of just faith and also financial literacy as well. So that's why I want to bring you on, because I think it's just an incredible story of you just being interconnected with, your African lineage, but also bringing your children along with the journey as well, and making a platform around that.
And you also, one other thing, I'm always known as like the different person. So I did not do any type of social media by choice until this year. So that means no Instagram. Last time I was on social media, it was a Black Panther page. And you might not remember
Black Panther. I remember Black Panther.
Black Panther. And then I was like, this is not for me, because I wanted to be more focused on my life than. And I think everybody's different, but I know that I would get consumed. So I never had a Facebook page, never had MySpace, never had all those iterations until now. But I think that allowed me to process myself, because I'm not as concerned. And this is something that, when you have spouses and other people get caught up in living other people's lives. Yeah. And I really never felt that pressure, like, oh, look what so-and-so's doing. We have more money than them. We should be able to do that trip, or we should be able to do that. And I just felt like, when you were just like focused on really developing yourself and developing authentic, personable relationships and investing into good meat, like good meat makes its own sauce, you're not really concerned about like what everybody else is doing. So I think that was good for me personally. And I'm not saying everybody needs to do that. Like they need to, go cold turkey on social media. But I realized that, hey, social media can be a good thing, because it's hard to be in media, do podcasts if you don't have no social. So that's why I was like, hey, I'm gonna need to start, developing some of these things. But I think that, that's part of our stories as individuals and as people, is understanding ourselves more and what's greater than outside of us. And how we can generally help people through the lives that we're living, and how we can help our children. How can we find ways to empower people? And we don't do that enough. How can I find a way to engender myself, to empower myself, to be balling, to be doing this and that? But I feel like there's a authentic benefit in your life to saying, hey, I help somebody do something great. And that's kind of like the overall genesis of hopefully what this story and what this podcast will be about.
Yeah. So when it comes to like the social media marketing and posting consistently, because it's a real long joke here on our podcast at TFG, because people that do follow me, they know I post stories here and there, but I don't really post that much. It's like, yeah, I care, but not really.
Yeah.
I'm busy living my life, and I'm busy investing in my life and trying to be the best version of me, the best version of being a woman, but being a woman that makes just impact on people, right? And I do it by sharing stories. And I'm a firm believer of, if you're continuously doing and living in your purpose, those things will come to you, right?
Yeah.
I found your video of you and your daughter, and I found out you went to Think. I'm like, okay, he looks familiar, and I came to your content because it resonated, right? And I think if people just be a little bit more intentional of what they post and continuously post whenever they want to, and that's okay. You don't have to be entangled, toxically entangled into social media and marketing. But I think that when you are purposely doing something to help and to serve, it has its benefits of impacting, because for the most part with us here at our podcast with the Financial Griot, we've been successful. I think for the break of the year is not only word of mouth, but marketing a little bit here and there, but just being ourselves, being authentic. We're not the most professional podcast, right? But we have fun. And we try to make it in terms of, having like these one-on-ones, these conversations, just like you have someone like you're standing, on the street corner or something like that with, right? And I think sometimes with social media, those lens and the camera and those reels is blocking us from what's actually matters in our lives, right? And it's conversation like this, it matters. So yeah, don't bill yourself too much about the marketing. People will come if you're living your purpose and you're sharing and you're serving people. It will come. So that's what I always think about that. So Mr. Robert, Family Abide, a faith, family, and finance podcast. Tell the people where they can find you.
You can find us at Family Abide pretty much everywhere, on Instagram, on TikTok. I'm trying to get on YouTube and shoot some content on there. So we are at Family Abide, but look forward to that. And on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all your major podcast outlets and hosts at Family Abide, a faith, family, and finance podcast.
What are some things that you have in the works, or is it just more content creation? Or
I have a couple of things in the works. So 2 or 3 major things. One is I have a concept of your word, your lesson, or your verse, your lesson. And I want to reach out to different people, different hosts. I mean, different people like I bring on the show. And I want to get a verse from them to help define who they are as a person. And I want to share that verse with my child and then record that. So it could be from the Bible. It could be from a song. It could be from your favorite movie. It could be from anywhere. But your verse, your lesson. And I'm going to take that and film it. Hey, what is something, there's a verse or a lesson in your life that helped inspire, motivate, push you to greatness. And I want to share that with our daughters and have them just receive something. And it might be something different to them, but at least they're exposed to it. And then we should be also having some other content talking about just how we go about living life. So for example, I want to talk about how was the experience of setting up savings account. A lot of times people don't know, well, what types of what type of accounts you can start: checking account, saving account, brokerage account. how do you do that for kids that are, there's kind of different rules. It's rules for kind of kids that are 13 under, and then kids that are minors between 13 and 17, and kind of talk on
like a guideline, how to
guidelines and
get through it.
and
Gotcha.
talk about those a little bit more. So those are some of the things that are on the plate. But life keep on lifing, and we are moving along, and trying to wear multiple hats. But it's good, being a father, being a husband, being a son, being a co-worker. They all have different meaning in your life, but they all play a role in who you are as an individual. So yeah.
You said a word there, Robert. You said a word there. Well, thank you once again for being on our podcast, The Financial Griot. I really enjoy this episode, and I hope everyone who's listening at this moment enjoy this episode as well. I'll place your handles on the episode notes. Thank you once again for tuning in. There's so many discussions that we don't have individually, we don't have collectively with our family and our friends. And I hope if you are listening to this episode that this is just a stepping stone to kind of identify certain things and certain issues that you're dealing with, to start having these conversations with yourself. If you have someone you can lean on, connect with them as well, and really try to branch out to say that you're not alone. There's people who have been experiencing the same thing that you're experiencing, maybe in a different way, but there's resources, there's everything out there. If you have children and you want to get them into a great financial path, Family About is a great podcast, and it's a starting stone and stepping stone to start having these conversations with your children, with your spouse potentially as well, so you can live a wealthily and just healthy life and whole life. That's what we discuss here on the Financial Griot. So my name is Alainta Ellison. Thanks again for tuning into TFG.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Griot podcast, powered by the Wealth Builders Collective.